You recall, we have opened up the ark. We have sung praises first to God and then shifted over into talking about the Torah coming out of the ark as well. We have said on Shabbat the Brich Shmei, this kind of Kabbalistic prayer instituted in the Zohar by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who said that when the ark is opened in synagogues for reading Torah publicly, it's an especially auspicious time for prayers. And now we are ready to take the Torah out of the ark. So I'll invite us to turn in our Siddurim for Shabbat and festivals to page 141.
I'm going to buy a seed shalom for myself. I don't have one.
So we're on page 141. Who is the person leading services? So we saw, interestingly, in the Masechet Sofrim, which is the earliest Torah service, we saw that it was the person chanting Haftarah who is presented with the honor of leading the Torah service, which is actually kind of strange because the Haftarah comes after the Torah readings. So why are we bringing this guy up early? That doesn't quite make sense. Our practice is, and this is, tends to be the what you see most traditionally, is that whoever led Shacharit, whoever was leading the Shacharit service, continues and leads the Torah service as well, just for continuity's sake. But it doesn't have to be that way. So you could technically the Torah service is a separate part of the service. So you could bring somebody else up to lead the Torah service. And so at a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, typically we invite the bar bat mitzvah to come up and lead us in the Torah service. And I know in some synagogues, they if it's not a bar bat mitzvah, they assign the leading of the Torah service to another person, and that which is perfectly acceptable. It is strange, however, that the Masechet Sofrim assigned the Torah service to the person doing the maftir. So in one clue, one possibility would be that in fact, what Masechet Sofrim is describing is not in fact the service to take the Torah out of the ark, but is actually the service to put the Torah back in the ark. And the clue to that might be that the very first prayer, the very first phrase that Masechet Sofrim mentions is the Ashrei. And in our service, the Ashrei comes after the Haftarah. So it might be that everything Masechet Sofrim is describing comes afterwards. And in fact, there was no opening ritual. We don't know. It's all speculation. But we're looking now in our service on 141. And the first thing we get is, should look a little familiar to us. Shema, right? So we first, somebody takes the Torah out of the ark. This actually could be an honor that would be assigned to somebody called motzi, which means to bring out. Typically, though, we have the gabbai. The gabbai takes the Torah out of the ark. Or if things are getting a little hairy and the gabbai is busy or flustered, then I'll take the Torah out of the ark and hand it to whoever is the person leading services. So that person recites this line, the Shema. Why? Why do we recite this line here?
Why do we do the Shema?
Yeah, what's the Shema doing here?
What is the Shema doing here, right? So we know from the Shema that it's supposed to be recited twice a day. When we lie down and when we rise up. And so we see the Shema appearing with the 3 paragraphs in the evening service and then in the morning service. We saw already at the beginning of Birchot HaShachar, we added an additional recitation of the Shema as part of our wake-up routine. And so now we have it really the 4th time for the day appearing here in the Torah service. And there's going to be a 5th time as well in Musaf on Shabbat. So we really like this line, apparently.
I have a complete random guess as to why.
Sure.
Is it because we used to recite the 10 Commandments and then weren't allowed to do Torah, so we put the Shema in its place?
Well,
We
Shema's
could
from the
use the
Torah
10
also.
commandments, but we don't.
Well,
That's true.
Yeah.
is it because we're going to read the Torah and we want everybody to hear it's the hero Israel. Here we are. We have the Torah. We're going to read
So
it.
because of the word listen, right? Shema, listen,
Yeah.
Israel, right?
Yeah,
So
that's what I think.
to get everybody to pay attention.
And then,
It might
Rabbi,
be simply that this
the
is just
whole
a beloved
Shema.
line, right? It's a very clear, simple statement of allegiance to God. And as we're taking the Torah out of the ark and about to read God's word, this, it's the closest thing we have to a statement of faith in our liturgy.
Yeah, and the whole Shema itself, you have to bind it's a sign and, teach it to your children and the whole thing.
Except that part of it is not, we don't include here. We just do this one line. And
Listen up. Listen up.
Listen up, right. And if you recall, this line appeared in the Masechet Sofrim version as well. So yeah, we've been doing this for quite a while. So the ritual is the person leading services holds the Torah, faces the congregation, recites this line, and then the congregation repeats it afterwards. One does not need to cover their eyes during this. I sometimes see people covering their eyes. We cover our eyes for the Shema in Shacharit and in Arvit, but not for this one. It's not required. So we have this line, and then we have another line, and we saw this in Masechet Sofrim as well, or at least versions of this. Echad Eloheinu Gadol Adonenu Kadosh Shemo. All right, Echad. So if you'll notice,
One
we
God.
ended Shema with the word Adonai Echad, and now we're starting the next line with Echad Eloheinu, right? So it's kind of the inverse of what we've just said. So one is our God. Gadol means great. Adonenu means our Lord. So great is our Lord. Kadosh Shemo. Holy, this translation is not very accurate. Holy is his name. Literally. And we've seen this a lot before, kind of the declaration of the holiness of God's name. But the ritual is the same as for the Shema. So the leader recites this line, and then the congregation repeats this line afterwards. And then one more line. So the leader at this point pulls a 180, turns around, faces the ark, faces east, and recites this line. And this line is a solo line with no repetition. So Gadlu Ladonai iti unaromama shemo yachdav. So acclaim Adonai with me. And Gadlu here is grammatically it's a command verb. So this is the equivalent of at the end of the Kaddish we say V'imru Amen. So it's the leader commanding the congregation to do something, right? So the leader says, Gadlu Ladonai iti, acclaim Adonai with me, or literally, like Gadol, proclaim God's greatness with me. Unaromama, and now we switch to the first person plural. Let us exalt his name together. So again, we have a mentioning of the shame of God's name. Although the choreography or the conversation, the ritual conversation that's taking place between the leader and the congregation is kind of interesting, right? So at this point, what the leader does is, after turning around facing the ark, singing this line, and while saying Gadlu, the leader takes a little bow towards the ark, just kind of leader's holding the Torah, so you don't want to bow too deeply, but just a little waist bow. And the congregation makes that bow along with the leader, but does not repeat this line. So how is the congregation going to respond to the command that the leader has just given? Right? The leader has just told the congregation to do something, to sing praises to God. And so that's what comes next. Right.
Praises to God.
And this line, this paragraph should be familiar, right? I'll sing it. Lecha Adonai hagedula v'hagevura v'hatifer, etc. Right? So, and let's just look at the translation. Yours, Adonai, is the greatness and the might and the splendor and the eternity and the majesty for everything in the heavens and on the earth. Yours, Adonai, is the kingdom and dominion and the sovereignty over all leaders. Exalt Adonai our God and bow down toward his footstool. He is holy. Exalt Adonai our God and bow down at his holy mountain, for Adonai our God is holy. So this is the congregation's response to having the leader just tell them to acclaim Adonai's greatness.
Mhm.
And notice as well, what is the first word that is used to describe God here? Hagedula, the greatness.
A great one.
So this whole paragraph is a perfect response to what the congregation has been told to do. So let's look a little more deeply. We have Gadlu Ladonai iti. So that we're covered with the Gedula line, and Uneromema Shemo Yachtav. Romem is to exalt, to declare something to be on high. So look at this right here. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu. Right? Exalt Adonai our God. So the first half responds to the first half of the verse, and the second half of what the congregation sings responds to the second half of the verse. Right? So just the parallels here are really, very precise, very carefully chosen. And so what is going on as the congregation is singing this paragraph?
Walking around with the
Right, so this is the procession. So the leader leads the procession around the sanctuary. People, and we saw this in Masechet Sofrim, people continue to face the Torah as it's going around the room. And as it passes by, of course, we touch something to the Torah's cloak, its robes, and give it a kiss as a way, again, of expressing our love for Torah.
Have we closed the ark?
Yes. After we took the ark was opened, we take the Torah out and then close the ark, and then
Right
the
after
leader
the
says
Shema.
Shema Yisrael. Yes.
Aha.
And is that done so there's not a conflict of interest of what to face? You can turn your back.
It's possible that we don't want to be, if we're going to be facing the Torah that's going around the room, we don't want to put our backs to an open ark.
Oh,
I could see that.
I think
I'm
that's a
sorry.
pragmatic answer.
What'd you say, Max?
I think that's a very pragmatic
Yeah, I
answer.
mean that would make sense. That sounds like the kind of thing that a rabbi would have come up with.
I have another question, which is about Norah, which gets added between Kadosh and Shemo on that second line.
Right. So if you see my little blue dot right there on high holidays and on Hoshana Rabbah and on Simchat Torah, we add the word Vinorah.
And that is strange because if you do something on Rosh Hashanah and you do it on Yom Kippur, you think it's like the insertions in the Amida and you do it during the 10 days of awe, but you don't add it on what's the Shabbat in the middle?
Shabbat Shuvah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is weird.
It's Norah means awesome, right? But in the real sense, Norah is in like fear, but in the kind of the awe-inspiring fear. So we say Kadosh V'Norah Shemo, holy and awesome is his name. This, by the way, was one of the versions we saw in Masechet Sofrim. I think there were 2 or even 3 variant verses of the Echad line, and all 3 are said, and Norah was included there. But in the tradition that developed, it only got attached to that one time of year. The high holidays are called the Yamim Noraim, right? The days of awe. So we say Kadosh V'Norah. Hoshana Rabbah, which is the 7th day of Sukkot, is considered to be kind of like the high holidays in some ways. Hoshana Rabbah, it's said that the final judgment, the final appeals are completed on Hoshana Rabbah, and that's the day that the world is judged for the water that it will receive in the upcoming year. So there's elements of high holidays that occur on Hoshana Rabbah. And then Simchat Torah. Simchat Torah is like I don't know, the rabbis just kind of threw all sorts of stuff in Simchat Torah to make it very grand. So that got added there too. Okay, let's go on. Okay, so the Mishnah says, Shlosha she'achlu ke'achat chayavin lezamein. 3 people who have eaten as one, or as together, chayavin, are obligated to do zimun. So zimun is the introduction to Birkat Hamazon, right? So, right? So when you've got 3 people eating together, then you don't just say Birkat Hamazon, you've got to begin with that zimun, and we got to say that together. So the Gemara asks, Menahane Mile, where are these words from? Where do we derive this commandment that 3 people, when they eat a meal together, have to do zimun? So Rav Asi gives us the answer. He says, "The Amar Kra," as the scripture says, "Gadlu l'Adonai iti unromama shemo yachdav." Right? Sound familiar? Right. This is the 3rd line. It's what the leader says, and so this verse is used as the derivation for the commandment to do zimun. Right? Gadlu. So this is somebody giving instructions to somebody else. Right? Declare God's greatness with me. Right? So it's like a join me to do this. Unaromama, let us together exalt his name. Right? So this is the verse that the rabbis identify as the source for zimun. So, so this verse is from Psalms, Psalm 34:4. So what the liturgy has done is it's kind of, and we've seen lots of examples of this in the Torah service, especially, where we take individual verses, especially from Psalms, and we put them into the liturgy in particular places. So here we've taken this, which initially was associated with eating a meal together. Now we're doing it as the leader giving instruction to the congregation. And now I'm going to look a little bit closer at what the congregation does when the Torah is being paraded around. So this passage, Adonai hagedula v'hagvura v'hatiferet v'hanetzach v'hahod ki chol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz Lacha Adonai m'lacha v'naseh lechol l'rosh. So this is a single verse, and it's from 1 Chronicles, and the person who says this verse is David, King David. Now, the book of Chronicles is kind of it's an official court history of the Davidic kingdom, and it's written after the books of Samuel and Kings, which are also describing the same. And sometimes the events, the details change a little bit. So David is not allowed to build the temple. He's got too much blood on his hands, and so in Kings, that honor is given to Solomon, King Solomon, to build the temple. Chronicles changes the story a little bit, and it says that David really wanted to build the temple, but God said, no, you got too much blood on your hands. But David started the project. And so Chronicles gives us, a few chapters worth of descriptions of how David got all the instructions for the temple, all the dimensions, the furnishings, how much gold needs to go in everything, and collected all the materials, right? He did the big fundraising project to pay for the temple, and then presented all of that, the building plans, all the supplies, even the people who are going to be in charge of charge of these things, presented all of those things to his son Solomon, said, okay, now you finish the job. And as part of the ritual around that, David sings this song in front of the assembled people. We've seen a number of times where the people have been assembled for some sort of really important, momentous occasion. We saw it with Ezra and Nehemiah gathering people to read Torah. It happens in the book of Joshua. Joshua brings everybody together. Solomon brings everybody together when he dedicates the temple. Moses brings everybody together when they're dedicating the sanctuary and installing the priests. And here we have David bringing everybody together and introducing this. This really is, it's a prayer. Now, we've seen this prayer already in our service. Anybody remember?
Rabbi?
Yeah.
When David did all this, doing the plans for the project, was the temple supposed to be in any way like the Mishkan? So are some of the plans in the Torah or no?
I would say yes. I mean, the Mishkan is kind of like the portable, smaller temple, right? And so that, and the same rituals that Aaron and the priests are doing in the Mishkan are what the high priests are doing in the temple as well. So it's very much a kind of like the prototype for it. If you really want to kind of go into that in detail, I recommend Richard Elliott Friedman's Who Wrote the Bible. He spends a lot of time with his theory around the relationship between the tabernacle and this Solomon's temple. So
I resent him.
Thank
sorry.
you.
I resent him. I mean, his new book, I mean, whatever that book is, you know, about how all these things really happen. They're not stories.
You don't like his book?
Well, no, because I like the stories in it. I don't like him saying that these things really did happen in history.
Oh, that's not what I mean, his purpose in that book is he's talking about how the Torah and really the Bible as we have it came to be, how it came to be, and really the brilliance of the way it got brought,
Well,
all the various elements of the Bible got brought
maybe I
together.
should see.
And
Well,
so
I'm
one of the things he
talking
does
about
is he talks about the relationship between the tabernacle, which is described in the Torah, and the Temple of Solomon, which is described in Kings, and puts them together, and you really see how the one is the prototype of the other. Anyway, we're gonna leave that aside. Does anybody remember where we have seen this in our service already?
Seen what?
Not just now?
Before this, we've seen this before. All right, it's at the end of Pesukei de Zimra. So if you look back to page 101, and this is probably a page before the Song of the Sea appears in the Siddur.
101.
Hmm.
Right, begin Vayevarech David. This is when kind of towards the end of Pesukei de Zimra, everybody stands up. Right, Vayevarech David et Adonai kol kahal vayomer David. David praised Adonai in the presence of all the assembled, saying, Baruch atah Adonai Elohei Yisrael Avinu me'olam v'ad olam. Right, there we see the formulation of the bracha, right? Praised are you, God of our father Israel, from the past to the future. And then our verse, Adonai Hagdula V'Gvura, etc. Yours are greatness and power, Adonai, glory and splendor and majesty, etc. So this is part of the lead-in to singing the Song of the Sea. We use David's prayer and already in the service, and then we pull it out again for the Torah service, but just that one line of it. And this is a really great line. If you just think, I mean, we have mentioned before just that the Torah service is very much like a coronation service. It's like we're in the royal chambers and the king is kind of parading around the room and we're giving the king honor. So the language here in this prayer is full of language of majesty and honor. This is very royal in its imagery, right? Although it's talking about God's dominion over all of the world and over all leaders in the world. The translation's a little clunky. I should have edited it a little better. All right, so that was the first half of the processional prayer, and now we get the second half. Romamu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu lahadom raglav kadoshu. This is from Psalm 99, verse 5. So Romamu, exalt, really to proclaim the highness of Adonai our God. V'ishtachavu, bow down lahadom. Hadom is the footstool, or hadom raglav, the footstool for his feet. Kadoshu, he is holy, or maybe it is holy. A little unclear. God's footstool is probably a reference to the temple. And the evidence for that is the next verse that we quote, which, if you'll notice, is from the same psalm, 4 verses later. Romamu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu. So far, it's exactly the same, but now we change it. Lahar kodsho ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Now it's exalt Adonai our God and bow down lahar kodsho, at his holy mountain, or maybe towards his holy mountain. For Adonai our God is holy. So we see lahadom raglav as being somewhat parallel to har kodsho. So God's footstool has something to do with God's holy mountain, which is Mount Zion and the temple, kind of the nexus of heaven and earth. And incidentally, we sing this prayer during Kabbalat Shabbat on Friday nights. So together they make up a perfect response to the Gadlu line that the leader gave us. So hopefully sometime around the end of this, the leader and the procession and whoever is part of that parade ends up back on the ark. If not, we stall with a nigun of some sort, and then we're ready to begin the Torah service. So how do we begin the Torah service? So we've got Gabayim up on the bima. We saw the Gabayim mentioned in Masechet Sofrim, that we need to bring up some other people to stand there with the Torah as a way to give honor to the Torah. We don't want to leave it alone, leave it by itself. These are the attendants to the king, or in this case, it's a way to give honor to the Torah. And what we call the calling Gabbai, or really the Gabbai Rishon, the first Gabbai, is in charge of calling up each of the honorees to the Torah. And before the first honoree is called up on Shabbat and festivals, there's kind of a fancy introduction. And this is not biblical. This is rabbinically composed, or maybe not even a rabbi. A person composed this. And you'll hear it. It'll sound something like this: V'yazor v'yagen v'yoshia l'chol hachosim bo v'nomar amen. V'nomar amen is we say amen. So what does the congregation do? Amen, right?
Amen.
Havu godel Eloheinu udnu chavod laTorah. Right? Kohen Krav Ya'amod. And then we say the person's name. We'll break it down momentarily. And then we end Baruch Shanatan Torah le'amo Yisrael b'kedushato. And then the congregation says the last line. Ve'atem hadvekim b'Adonai Elohechem chaim kulchem hayom. And then the Gabbai repeats that line. Right? So we have Gabbai does the first paragraph, congregation recites the final line, and then the Gabbai repeats that final line. So what does it mean? May he help, shield, and save all who trust in him. And let us say amen.
Amen.
Short little prayer. Let us all ascribe greatness to our God and give honor to the Torah. All right, again, bringing everybody together. We're about to read from the Torah. We're going to give it honor. And then Kohen Krav. So Kohen Krav means come near. Kohen, approach. Then we say Ya'amod. Right, so Ya'amod means to stand up. Right? Ya'amod, stand up, command. And then here in the Hebrew it says Ploni ben Ploni. That's basically John Doe, right? Ploni ben Ploni means John Doe. So, you call the person son of the, whoever their father is traditionally. Now we would add the mother, and HaKohen, the Kohen, right? And then blessed is the one who gave the Torah to his people Israel in holiness. Okay? And now the congregation, all you who cling to Adonai, your God, are alive today. And this line is from Deuteronomy, I believe.
So, excuse me, is it just one Kohen who's got the honor, or do all the Kohanim in the
No,
congregation?
just one Kohen. One Kohen is given the honor. All right, which I want to spend a bit of time talking about that. Why does the Kohen get the first Aliyah? Any ideas?
Because it goes back to the priesthood, I imagine.
Goes back. Oh yeah, that's what a Kohen is, right?
It's the
Because
classiest.
the
priest.
Kohen was the one who would enter into the Holy of Holies.
Yeah. What does that have to do with reading Torah in public? Right.
Maybe it's like an
The first
equivalent.
Torah readings were done in synagogues, not as part of a service, right? It was very democratic, right? We saw men and women were gathered together in synagogues for the purposes of hearing the Torah being read.
Mhm.
Is this trying to merge in the temple service in with the synagogue service?
Maybe, except we've seen that Shacharit is really the thing that's modeled after the temple service.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't really make sense to have Kohanim in the Torah service. If there was something that the Amida was preferred to be led by a Kohen because it's a replacement for the sacrificial service, that kind of would make sense, but that's not what we see here.
Not only that, then the rabbis repeatedly proclaim the precedence of Torah study and wisdom over Kohen or status or things like that, right? They say that even a mamzer who's a scholar is better than a Kohen who's an ignoramus.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and yet here we have the Kohen getting the first Aliyah, and it doesn't make sense.
Is there anything related to Bechor and firstborn and Kohen?
So firstborn and Kohen. Well, I mean, yes, there is something, because before the priesthood was established as a hereditary thing, it was the Bechor, the firstborn male child, would be brought to the temple and dedicated to serve God, and that was kind of like we see that, and so the tradition of Pidyon Haben, redeeming the firstborn son from a Kohen. Rita, you said that your grandson just had his Pidyon Haben
Last week, yeah.
So that's because technically he belongs to God, and so he has to be purchased back. And so the Kohen, as kind of God's
Emissary,
right? Own your grandson, and so they sold him back for 5 half shekels to his parents. So I'm just kind of an elaborate ritual around.
It's all yours now.
So does that status have anything to do, like almost like as a symbolic firstborn, why the Kohen gets to go first?
All right, well, let's find out. This is enough guesses for now. We have an answer. This is from the Mishnah Gittin, chapter 5, Mishnah 8. Elu dvarim amru b'pnei darchei shalom. So these are the things, or the matters, that they said on account of darchei shalom, the ways of peace. All right. So what are the ways of peace?
Not to argue, maybe.
Right. So there's some sort of need for preventing arguments or fighting, or this term comes up in context of relationships with non-Jews, where we do certain things that maybe technically we're not required to do, but because of darchei shalom, we do them. So maybe there's an element of public relations that's associated with it. So we have a number of decrees that the sages enacted because of darchei shalom, right? Torah doesn't necessarily require this, but peace does require it. First one mentioned, Kohen Koreh Rishon, Ve'acharav Levi, Ve'acharav Yisrael, Mipnei Darchei Shalom. Right? The Kohen reads first, and after him, Levi, and after him, Yisrael, because of Darchei Shalom, because of the ways of peace. All right, so what does this have to do with peace?
Is there anything to do with Korach and the whole upset about being a Levi versus who's the leader and all of that?
Okay, so there were fights. Korach wants to be. Korach is a Levi, though.
Yeah, so instead of Moses,
all right.
Sort of a way of having taking out the fight between who's best. The Cohen's first, the Levi is second, somebody else is third. No arguing now.
No arguing. Okay, and in fact, that's exactly right. So here's what Rashi says. So the people would not come to fight. The sages decreed this order. Then they say, the takanta de Rabbanani, since it is an edict of the sages, a decree of the sages, tu lo matzinan lishnuye lememar anna karina beresha. We will no longer find that people are trying to disagree with each other and say, I should read first, right? So whoever goes first, it's considered to be a bigger honor. So one can imagine people getting into fights in synagogue over who gets the honor of having the first aliyah. So in order to stop people from fighting in shul, the sages said, no, the first aliyah goes to a Kohen, the second goes to a Levi, the third to a Yisrael. No fighting.
How about if you got like 10 Levium and
maybe the Kohanim could fight amongst
There's another
themselves.
opportunity to get
Yeah.
upset.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just say, as a Kohen, I get lots of over the course of my life, I have gotten lots of aliyot. So perhaps the feeling of maybe wanting to sometimes have an aliyah is not as strong for somebody who gets aliyot much more frequently. So I suppose. All right, so let's go a little further. The Shulchan Aruch spends a lot of time talking about all the ins and outs of the aliyot. So it says Kohen Koreh Torah Rishon v'acharav Levi v'acharav Yisrael, taking the exact language of the Mishnah. Kohen reads first from the Torah, followed by a Levi, followed by a Yisrael. Now let's look at the Mishnah Brura. So Mishnah Brura is the Chafetz Chaim, and it's not that. So he lived around the turn of the 20th century and wrote a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch on Orach Chaim, which is the part of the Shulchan Aruch that deals with ritual matters relating to services and the holidays. So he explains a little bit more around this, around why it's there. So he says, first of all, dichtiv v'kidashto. So as it is written, and then he cites Leviticus chapter 21, verse 3, and in this, he's citing the Gemara that talks about the Mishnah that we just looked at. It says, you must sanctify them. So this is the, in Parshat Emor, when the Torah is describing a lot of laws pertaining to the Kohanim, pertaining to the priests. So it uses this expression, you must sanctify them with their breads, and it goes on. And then he goes on, B'kiblu Chazal, and so the sages accepted this regarding any matter of sanctity. And they say, Liftoach Rishon, to open first, and that means to speak first in the Beit Midrash, right? So they're given the honor of, I guess, maybe making the first comment or asking the first question or something. Ulevarech Rishon, to bless first. And this is talking about Birkat HaMazon. So earlier we were talking about the Zimun. So who leads the Zimun? So according to this, if there's a Kohen present, the Kohen leads the Zimun. And I've been in, very from households. I've been, as the Kohen, invited to lead Birkat Hamazon for that reason. V'litol maneh yafeh rishon, and to take a fine portion of food first, right? So, all the food set out on the table. Who gets to go first in the buffet line? The Kohen. All right. Umi kol makom ratza kohen lechalok kavod lerabo ulemi shegadol mimenu harashut beyado. But if the Kohen wants to give honor to his Rav, to his teacher, or to somebody who is more distinguished than him, the permission is in his hands, right? So the Kohen can forego that honor. Aval, but Li'inyan likrot b'Torah, in the matter of reading from the Torah, b'Beit HaKnesset, in the synagogue, taknu chazal mipnei darchei shalom. So the sages decreed, because of darchei shalom, because of the ways of peace, she'ein hakohen v'halevi yicholin limchol, that the Kohen and the Levi are not allowed to forego. Ella, davka Kohen koreh rishon v'acharav Levi v'acharav Yisrael. Davka, it's got to be that the Kohen reads first, and followed by the Levi, followed by the Yisrael. Kedei shelo yavo hadavar lidei machloket, so that the matter does not come into a dispute. Shekol echad yomar ani gadol ve'ekra rishon, that everyone would say, I am gadol, I'm better, I'm more distinguished, and I should read first. Ve'en chiluk ben Shabbat ve'yom tov l'sheni v'chamishi v'shar zmanim shekarin bahen. So, and there is no difference whether it's Shabbat or Yom Tov or Monday or Thursday or any of the other times when we read Torah on them, right? The Kohen always goes first. Im ein Kohen b'Beit HaKnesset, holchin achar gadol b'chochma u'minyan, af al pi sheha'acher gadol b'shanim. If there's no Kohen present, there's no Kohen in synagogue, then we go after the person who is greatest in wisdom, and even if there is somebody who is more elder to that person who is present, right? Wisdom takes precedence over age.
And
I
that
thought we
person
switched
takes
to-
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
That person takes precedent over a Levi. You wouldn't just say, we don't have a Kohen.
If we'll get to this momentarily, but the rule is that if there is no Kohen, but let's start off. If there's no Levi, right? You got a Kohen, but you don't have a Levi. So you call up the Kohen for the first Aliyah. For the second Aliyah, the Kohen stays up there and has the second Aliyah as well.
That's if there's no Levi.
Right? Why? Because a Kohen is from the house of Levi, right? It's the Kohanim are kind of a subset of the Levites, right? Aaron, the high priest, he was from the tribe of Levi. So, Ken, do you have a question?
Yeah, how is this working out in our age of increasing egalitarianism?
Right. So we're gonna go there in a moment.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, this is very inegalitarian. So, but I want to point out that although, as we can see from the Mishnah Berurah's comment, the sages rooted this concept of the Kohen going first in a verse in the Torah. The real reason is that people were fighting over getting the first Aliyah. And lest you think that this is just kind of made up, I have seen fights in synagogue over Aliyot. I have seen people get really upset when they didn't get an Aliyah and they thought they were entitled to one. I was once in a synagogue in Israel where the service was brought to a standstill over somebody who felt that he should be given an Aliyah and he wasn't.
Oh my goodness.
So this is certainly an issue. I think in our well-behaved community, this is not so much an issue, but I can tell you that on more than one occasion, there have been people who have felt slighted because they were not given an Aliyah for one reason or another.
I know that.
Well, or is that mostly because they had someone to they had a reason, like like a family member just died, they were a mourner or something.
Yeah, there might have been a reason, but for whatever event that, there's somebody, I should get an aliyah, and there's not enough aliyot to go around, and so.
Can I ask a question? I'm
Sure.
sorry, it confuses me. So when we talk about an aliyah, are we talking about reading from the Torah, or are we talking about the person that goes up and says
blessing.
the blessing before the reader?
Okay,
The
so
blessing.
so in earlier, in talking about the Torah service, we read that there, like on Shabbat, for example, 7 people come up to read Torah.
Right.
The first one says a bracha before the first reading. The last one says a bracha after the last reading. And then we have 7 aliyot, seven separate readings, with no brachot before and after them. Eventually that changed, and we got a bracha before and after each aliyah. Originally, it was the person who is reading Torah who has the aliyah. So, but that leads to a problem. What if you don't have
Not many
people
people
who know how to read Torah? Or what if you want to be able to give aliyot to people who don't know how to read Torah in one's community? So it makes it pretty exclusive, right? So it was split up. The person having the aliyah is different than the person reading Torah. The person reading Torah is reading on behalf of the one who is receiving the aliyah. Technically, the person having the aliyah should be kind of reading along with the reader, and even in an undertone saying the words after the reader, right? So that they also are being a reader. Practically that
I think didn't you cover that a little bit before?
Yeah, I mentioned that.
Yeah.
I haven't
Right? So
been
when we
able
talk
to
about
come.
having an aliyah, the expression having an aliyah is the person who's being called up to receive the honor, to say the blessings, not necessarily the person reading Torah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I usually am teaching, so I can't.
No, it's a good question. It's something that I think a lot of people get confused around, right?
Well, it's almost like during a bris where the father is supposed to be one doing the work of the moil, but he can say that there's someone doing it on his behalf.
Right. In that case, he's appointing a shaliach, the
Yeah.
mohel to be his shaliach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also noticed with regard to this this quote here, and I know that Kohanim, including you, if there's a reason for someone else to have the first aliyah, you have to leave the room.
Yeah, so this is pretty clear. I mean, Kohen are not allowed to forego it. You can imagine that if what the Mishnah Berurah is describing is reality and people getting upset, that if a Kohen were to forego his aliyah for someone else who he considers to be wiser or more deserving, you could imagine that somebody might feel slighted by not being the one chosen.
And what happens if there's multiple Kohanim in the room?
Yeah, so then you pick one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, and I suppose technically you should pick the one who is wisest among them, and then you're back to the original problem. Yeah, so what I will do, so what Cindy's mentioning, is what I will do sometimes if I'm the only Kohen there, and as I said, I get lots of aliyot, so sometimes I'll step out of the room if there still will be a minyan, and therefore there's no Kohen present to call up, and then we can call up anybody. So we talked about if there's a Kohen but no Levi. Now, if there's no Kohen, then you can call up anybody to the first aliyah.
Oh.
There is a tradition to, not a law, but not required, but a tradition to give a Levi the first aliyah if there's no Kohen there.
That's just tradition.
That's just a tradition, yeah. That doesn't have to. But if you call up let's say there's no Kohen there, you call up a Yisrael for the first aliyah, but there is a Levi there, you're not allowed to call up a Levi for the second aliyah.
Oh.
All right. We don't want to create confusion around. So, but a Levi can have one of the later aliyot. Anyway, so these rules get kind of technical. let's go on. So this is from Sinai's Gabbai guide. So these are our policies at Sinai and how we deal with honors. All right, so first of all, for Kohen and Levi Aliyot, the Kohen and Levi Aliyot go to the son of a Kohen and the son of a Levi, respectively. As I just described, if a Kohen is called for the first Aliyah and no Levi is present, the same Kohen takes the second Aliyah, right? If a Kohen is not present, the Sinai custom is to call a Levi for the first Aliyah. Otherwise, the first two Aliyot go to Yisrael.
What happens to the second Aliyah in that circumstance?
The second Aliyah should not go to a Levi. It should go to Yisrael.
Okay, so you don't keep the Levi up there.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so Ken asked about that this is a kind of an inherently inegalitarian system, right? That we've got essentially a caste system where we're giving particular honors to people, and specifically to males based on their hereditary path. And that's true. I would say that this is an area in which Sinai is inegalitarian, is on the more traditional side. It is something that has been expressed to me on more than one occasion as being important to the community. There are still, at least on Shabbat and festivals, lots of other aliyot available, so that we generally have enough, aliyot to give to people who might need an aliyah. But I think this is something that has been, important to the community to preserve. I think I've mentioned before that, as you can see, it says the son of a Kohen or the son of a Levi. Why not the daughter of a Kohen or the daughter of a Levi? I've been very, very vocal about this, that when someone with standing comes forward and requests to be able to have that Bat Kohen or Bat Levi Aliyah, then we'll bring it to the ritual committee and discuss it. It's something that the CJLS, the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, has dealt with, and I've studied the issue and I'm somewhat familiar with it. I need to refresh myself if we were going to study it. But so far in my 13.5+ years at Sinai, no daughter of a Kohen or daughter of a Levi has come forward to request an aliyah.
Including your own daughter.
Including my own daughter. Yeah. And she's.
So I have a question. Otherwise, the first aliyah goes to Israel, to an Israel. So that can be a woman or a man, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. All right. Now, aliyot priorities, right? And this is what gives the honors gabbai a headache.
Tell me about it.
All right.
Especially on Yom
these
Tovim.
are guidelines for priorities for having an aliyah at Sinai. Sometimes somebody will call to the office ahead of time and say, I'd like to have an aliyah this Shabbat. And when that's the case, we do our best to make sure that person gets an aliyah. Sometimes they'll ask that day. Hopefully they get there early so that the honors gabbai has not distributed those honors yet, right? Or if we have a special guest or something like that, then we've got some flexibility in these priorities. But these priorities are based on traditional sources. And as you can see, we there is a history of people arguing over these things. All right, so first of all, the person who has the greatest priority is a bridegroom and or a bride on their wedding day or on the Shabbat prior to their wedding, right? We call this an ufruf, right? This takes precedence over everybody else to have an aliyah. Next, a bar or bat mitzvah. This is the child receiving an aliyah. Next, parents naming a baby or a brit, having a brit milah on that day or on the Shabbat prior to that day. Right? Now, traditionally, as you can imagine, all of these would apply just to a male. So for all things other than the Kohen and Levi aliyah and duchening, Sinai is, I would say, is fully egalitarian. Fourth, a bridegroom or a bride on the Shabbat after the wedding, right? So this would be during Sheva Brachot, which is the 7 days following the wedding. Next, a person observing a yortzeit for a parent on that particular day. Right. Next, if the yortzeit for a parent is coming up in the upcoming week. All right, I want to show, all right, and we'll do one more. A mourner on the Shabbat after the end of Shiva, right? So during Shiva, a mourner is not allowed to have an aliyah, but unless they're a Kohen can, if we need a Kohen, a mourner can have that aliyah. But after Shiva is over, then a mourner should, if there's one available, get an aliyah. A person who wants to bench Gomel, which we will talk about. Gomel is a prayer that if a person kind of successfully gets through a life-threatening experience, they would come in synagogue, have an aliyah, and then bench Gomel. So say a blessing, kind of thanking God for delivering and doing it publicly. And the congregation is involved in that prayer as well. All right, now, all right, so first of all, before we get into the Kiddush sponsor, I'll hold this up. This is the Gabbai sheet that is prepared each week. Miriam prepares these, so Miriam, these look very familiar to you.
Yes.
So you will see in this section over here, it says Yartzites. This is a previous couple weeks ago for February 5th to 12th. All right, so these are the names of everybody who's in our database whose Yartzeit. So the anniversary of their death is coming up that week. And then it says, you can see it says remembered by and relation. So who is the person in the synagogue who submitted that name as a relative whose Yartzeit is occurring, and then what the relation is. And so this gets printed on the Gabbai sheet every week, and it's there for two reasons. One, so that I can read the names for all the upcoming Yartzeits at the end of services before the mourner's Kaddish, but also so the honors Gabbai knows who to approach to give an aliyah out to. And so the honors Gabbai will often come up to me if they don't know everybody on the list, the remembered by column, and they'll ask me if any of those people are in services, and they will make their best effort to offer an aliyah to anybody who's on this list with somebody who is remembering a mother or father taking precedence over other relationships. So in that, you can see that this is coming directly out of this priorities for Aliyah, where we try and give that. And people will come to synagogue when they've got a Yartzeit coming up, and often are coming to synagogue hoping, some cases they may be expecting to have be offered an Aliyah in services. And sometimes it can be a challenge for the Gabbayim when there are, let's say, too many people with a Yartzeit, or if there's a bar mitzvah when a lot of the aliyot are already accounted for. But as you can see, when we added to this traditional list, the Sinai minhag, if somebody's sponsoring the Kiddush, give an aliyah. If someone is observing a Yartzeit for a child, a sibling, or a spouse on that day, followed by in the upcoming week. And then if there's a guest, if there's somebody who's in synagogue who is, traveling or new to the community, then we try and give that person an honor as well. And then if somebody's got a special birthday or an anniversary, you would make an effort to give an honor out. But you can imagine this can be difficult and stressful for our honors gabayim.
Yes, I can attest to
May-
that.
May I ask some questions here on Sinai procedures?
Yeah.
Other honors like opening and closing the ark, dressing or undressing the Torah, does the honors gabbai also do that and using this kind of a thing so that it can spread out more?
Yes, and I think the general idea is that, like on Shabbat, having one of the 7 aliyot are kind of the biggest honors.
Okay.
But the honors gabbai certainly will use anything that where we call somebody up, opening the ark, lifting, dressing the Torah, reading one of the English prayers. Those are, this list is kept in mind for distributing those as well. And sometimes the honors gabbai will hang on to a couple of the later aliyot and not distribute them in case somebody walks into shul late.
Okay. And the second question I have is, are couples ever come up, like say an anniversary? Do you ever have a husband?
Yeah,
and
another
wife?
good question. So there, the ritual committee dealt with that a number of years ago, and we learned about it. Ultimately, that's a decision for me to make as the Mara Da'atra. It's kind of literally the master of the place, but I'm the halachic authority for the community. The Committee on Jewish Law and Standards dealt with that issue and passed a couple of different responsa dealing with that question. And after studying them, I was not convinced as to the acceptability of group aliyot, right? That really it should be one person. And this is based, and I mentioned this a previous week, the expression that appears in Tractate Megillah of Trei Kale La Mishtamae, 2 voices cannot be distinguished, right? So the halacha is that when reading Torah, you can only have one voice. You can't have in stereo reading of the Torah. It's got to be just one person. And the original idea is that the person having the aliyah is the person reading Torah. So it's as if the Oleh is reading Torah. So to call up more than one person is effectively having 2 voices reading the Torah. And so that didn't seem to be right to me when looking at the sources. That said, there are certainly circumstances when it might be meaningful to people to be able to be up with a spouse. And so so what we would do in the case of, usually just for a simcha, or maybe if it's an anniversary, we would call up one person accompanied by their partner, right? So we call them up in the singular, ya'amod or ta'amod, and then with their partner, their spouse, and that way, technically the person who was called up first is the person having the aliyah, and they get an escort. And really, so only that first person should be saying the blessings over the Torah reading.
Very Solomonic of you.
So
I
no,
must
we don't
say.
stop somebody if they both start
That's happened. This happened.
singing the blessings, but
No,
so
I
that
have-
was the approach. And I didn't come up with that solution. That was a recommendation that the CJLS made to deal with the issue.
But what about on Simchat Torah when we have like all the children come up, or on that, we do that in groups.
Yeah, Simchat Torah is kind of like
It's on its head anyway.
Yeah, in fact, in the discussions around this, Simchat Torah is brought up as an example, and it's the exception that proves the rule.
Okay.
We do sometimes do it during a bar bat mitzvah, and the grandparents come up or so, and then the grandfather is the one who's reading, and the grandmother is just standing there.
Or the other way around.
Or the other
Right.
way around,
Right.
yeah.
And
also
sometimes,
very clear as well that whoever is the person called up, that's the aliyah. So
Yeah,
let's say you've got a woman and a man, and the man is a Kohen, right? So, and we're going to call them up as a couple on a bar mitzvah, right? So we would, if we're giving them the first aliyah, then we would call up Ya'amod HaKohen Im Ishto and the wife, right? So we would call up the Kohen accompanied by his wife. If let's say the wife is going to have the honor, then we would call her up for not for the Kohen aliyah, but accompanied by her husband, who is a Kohen, for a later aliyah. And so I try to be very clear that it's, we are egalitarian in the sense of assigning that, right? So there's not at all a preference that the grandfather should get the aliyah accompanied by the grandmother. So.
Okay.
And
I-
another, sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
So, and then another question regarding the potential for a Bat Kohen or Bat Levi. Would there be a not requirement, it's a little too strong, but kind of a suggestion that it's not just for this one-time event, but that person then participate in all of the things that Kohanim and Leviim do, like duchening and all of that? Like, is it supposed to be an obligation that they take on, or?
No, actually not. Duchening and aliyot are different issues halachically. So I've not studied the duchening issue, but well, first of all, we've seen duchening is the priestly blessing when the priests get up on the holidays and do that thing. The halachic issues are completely different. As we've seen already, the idea of a Kohen having the first aliyah is not from the Torah, right? It's considered to be a decree by the rabbis brought in for a particular reason, right? To stop people from fighting. Which means that there may be some flexibility over there regarding aliyot that you wouldn't necessarily find over duchening, which is, more about, that kind of halacha from the Torah. So there's really, you'd have to, there would be different halachic arguments to be made. So if a community is committed to, making these decisions from a halachic perspective, then they would have to really go into the individual issues. In terms of other things that pertain to Kohanim and Leviim, well, really, Leviim wash hands, the hands of the Kohanim for duchening. So that would be something to explore as well. And then other than that, there's things like Kohanim aren't supposed to go into a cemetery. But that's by custom also. There's not a whole lot that we do today that preserves the status of Kohanim and Leviim. This was something really important 2,000 years ago in temple times, right? The caste system was very much alive and well back then. And so the rabbinic sources spent a lot of time talking about that. Nowadays, there's really not very much that distinguishes a Kohen from a Levi, a Kohen from a Levi from a Yisrael in terms of everyday Jewish life.
But considering it's like the only thing left that has the non-egalitarian aspect to it, those things are the only thing left that's also non-egalitarian.
Yes, and if you go into conservative synagogues, that you'll find a variety of practices. You'll have some synagogues that have gotten rid of the Kohen and Levi designations altogether, and they just call up a Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi, and then others will call up a daughter of a Kohen or a daughter of a Levi. I've been to synagogues where they'll call up the wife of a Kohen or Levi as well. Some synagogues are kind of inconsistent. Sometimes they'll call up a Kohen for the first aliyah, sometimes not. I was at a shul when I worked in Vancouver. They would sometimes call up they would do exactly what the Shulchan Aruch or what the Mishnah Berurah said not to do, and he would say birshut hakohen or b'mechilat hakohen, which is with the permission or with the foregoing of the kohen, and call someone else up. So it's kind of an acknowledgement that, you know, we would normally call up a kohen, but, you know, we're giving this other person the honor, and the kohen has agreed to do that. And the Shulchan Aruch does get into that a little bit. There might be reason to, at least on a Monday or Thursday when there's only 3 aliyot and we're not supposed to add any additional aliyot, there might be a little bit more wiggle room there than on Shabbat, where there's lots of other aliyot available.
I gotta go.
Excuse me.
All right, so I think this is a good place to stop.
Yep,
Well,
I gotta go.
this is
See you later.
so long.
Bye.
We'll,
Bless you, Susan.
Thank you very much. It always feels so good to get blessed in this kind of a setting.
I mean, thank you.
yeah. So this is all very practical halacha that we've that we.
Rabbi, I
here.
was going to ask about keeping the aliyot on the bima after, you know, after they were, so would you cover that next week, please?
Sure. Yeah, we're going to go over the mechanics of having an aliyah.
Okay, so
Next
thank
week.
you.
Yeah.
and-
So
Thank you.
When do you sit there?
yeah, Ken, did I answer your question?
Oh, you did. You
Okay.
did. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. You know,
So complicated.
it's complicated, and part of it is that I'm just not I don't want to make, I want to be deliberate. If we're talking about making changes to the way things have been done, I want to make sure that we're, you know, we know what we're doing, and that there's a real need, there's a call for it from the community to do so. So I mean, that's, and we're recognizing that in the Sinai community, there are quite a number of, I think, much more traditionally minded people in the community for whom some of these things are really, really important. And just given the history of Sinai around ritual matters as well, yeah, and I've learned my lesson also from a few examples.
I read something in the bulletin inviting people to come, that the children were doing their first Torah readings from the, so are we educating a group of more Torah literate congregants, do you think, or not really? Do you know what I'm saying? You know, like those wonderful people who can just come in and they know Torah from Cheder.
Sadly, no, we're
Okay.
not. You know,
It's a good try. It's something I really
Okay.
love that. I love that, because you wonder if the kids could get a little taste of the
it's
joy
hard.
of being able to
There's
do
a
that.
lot of competing.
Sure, there's
roles
always
in
soccer.
it.
Yes.
So it is a challenge.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Rabbi.
you so much. I really miss my Tuesday class with you.
All right. Well, it's nice to have you back, Libby. You on break all week?
Yes.